right. Terrific. Thank you so much. And my name is Tim Augustine. Thanks for joining the call tonight on urgent industries, landing a job in a rebounding economy. Megan, Jamie, and those of you that have joined, I really appreciate you taking the time. If at the end of this presentation, if you didn't get some of your questions answered, I will give you my email address as well as my cell phone. If you want to call me at the end of this, or you want to call me later in the week to ask me more questions, I would be happy to take your call. A lot of the information we're going to cover tonight is based on a book that I've written called How Hard Are You Knocking? Landing a Job in a Rebounding Economy. It came out a few years ago as the economy was coming out of the recession. And a lot of the research that we did was through Northwestern, and we worked with a lot of senior executives. We asked them what was most important with the candidates that they were interviewing. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about in regards to urgent industries is based on that research. Let me at least tell you a little bit of background about myself because it'll be pertinent to this topic. So I was initiated in 1992. I'm an alumni of Beta Pi chapter at Kent State University, and I've tried to remain as active as possible in the fraternity, whether it's lead or Grand Chapter Congress, throughout the years. I'm also lucky enough to be a trustee on the foundation this year, and so I give a lot of my success in business. I attribute that to Delta Sigma Pi significantly. In fact, I married a brother. On the professional side, I actually own a company called Atwell. We are a real estate development consulting firm, and we work in three major industries. We work in traditional real estate development, like residential, commercial, office buildings, healthcare. We also work in power and energy industry, which is wind farms and solar development, as well as battery storage. So we've designed and permitted about 800 wind farms around the country, probably 800 solar facilities, as well as battery storage. And then we're also in the oil and gas industry. And so the reason I bring up that the career at Atwell is we have 28 offices around the country, and we have about 1,000 employees now. And so the reason I bring that up is when I'm interviewing candidates, it's critically important that the candidate understands and has a passion for the industry that they're interviewing for. So for instance, when I'm interviewing people for the power and energy group, I'm really interested in understanding your interest in the industry. For instance, I would much rather hire somebody that's interested in the renewable energy industry that might have a GPA of 2.8 than I would be hiring a person that has a 4.0 that doesn't really care about my industry. So understanding the industry and having a passion for it and sharing that interest during the interview is absolutely a differentiator. And so I bring that up because we do a lot of hiring. We bring in a lot of interns every year. We've already hired 200 people this year alone. And so a lot of the conversation I'm going to bring up tonight is going to be based on my experience interviewing candidates, talking to candidates, and what I look for as an employer. And then also the point of the research for my book. So let me at least share knowing the market. And I know, Megan, you're in the car, so you won't be able to see some of these slides. But again, I'll send you the slides. But right now is a candidates market, absolutely. Meaning there are less candidates for the positions that are posted, which means you are in the driver's seat. As a corporation, as a company, I'm desperate to find qualified candidates. So that is a good position to be in as a candidate, is that you will actually get to spend a little bit of time researching the companies, researching the industries, finding a company you're interested in, and then seeking out that job. Chances are there's going to be less candidates going for the position than years prior. Number two is I'm looking for a passion or an interest in my industry. So again, we're in three major industries. I'm in real estate development, I'm in power and energy, and oil and gas. So I'm desperately interested in understanding that you, the candidate, has a passion for that industry. And again, I'd much rather hire somebody that has a passion for real estate development than just somebody that's a good student. Because if they have a passion for the industry, there's a good chance that they're going to go above and beyond the normal job description. They're going to spend more time, have more passion, be more excited about the success of my firm if it's in the industry that they like, which is why I mentioned that. Number three, tonight we're going to talk about seeking urgent industry. So it's up to you to find in, not only do I want to know what industry you're passionate about, but I want to know what are the urgent industries that you're going to go for. And the way I define an urgent industry is it's an industry that's expected to grow in the next 10 years. I'm going to show you tonight some industries that are expected to grow. In fact, the top 5 industries that you should pursue. I'm also going to talk about the declining industries that you should stay away from. But seeking the urgent industries and understanding the industries that are expected to grow in the next 10 years will only benefit you. It'll benefit the companies you go to. There will be growing companies, which means opportunity for you, so on and so forth. I'm going to give you some slides tonight or some resources to conduct your own research. So I will give you some websites. I'll give you some tools to conduct your research when you're looking at those industries. And the last point I want to make is the reason I want you to think about urgent industries and having a passion for that industry is I want you to differentiate yourself. Granted, it's a candidates market. So therefore, instead of getting 25 candidates for a job posting, I might get 3. But you still want to differentiate yourself. When you're interviewing, you want to show the employer that you've done your research, you're passionate about the industry that they're in, you've done your research, and you're qualified to add value to the company. So the first step of looking for a new job is really understanding the market, understanding what you're passionate for, and differentiating yourself in the job market. So the way the industry is defined is it's activity that is concerned with production of goods, extraction of materials, or provision of services. So an industry is either you're producing goods and selling them, you're extracting minerals, or you're doing some type of extraction or construction. And then lastly is you're providing a service. And that's really what I want you to think about right now. Is my question for you is, where is your passion? What industry do you have a passion for right now? Sitting in your room right now, watching this webinar, where do you have some interest? Now, I just want you to think about, and I just put on the screen some samples. Do you have an interest in manufacturing or construction? What about engineering, real estate, technology, healthcare, agriculture, mining, automotive? Are you interested in fashion or retail? Do you want to work in the government? Do you want to work in nonprofit, which is also an industry? Do you want to work investment, advertising, telecommunications? I mean, the sky's the limit. There are tons of industries out there, and you don't have to pick one. The one question I often get from candidates when I'm presenting How Hard Are You Knocking is I bring up this industry point, and a lot of candidates will say, well, do I have to pick one? Absolutely not. I'd be interested, are there 2 or 3 that you have an interest for? And again, this goes back to, for instance, if I own a bike shop, don't I want to hire people that are passionate for biking? I don't want to hire somebody that's never been on a bike before. And again, even if they're doing accounting or they're doing sales or they're doing repair, again, I want to hire somebody that has a passion for biking if I own a biking business. It's the same thing across the board. If I'm hiring somebody in the real estate development group in my company, I want to know that you have a passion for real estate. When I'm hiring somebody in power and energy or renewables, when we're doing wind and solar projects, I want to hire somebody that has a passion for renewable energy, that has a passion for sustainability, whatever it may be. So the first step of thinking about an industry is thinking about, what are you passionate about? What do you like to watch on TV? What do you like to think about? What do you like to discuss with your friends? When something comes on the news about an industry, is there some industry that piques your interest? So that's the first question I have for you, is what industry or industries do you have a passion for? Now, I'm going to stop right there because I know a couple of you on the call might have a few questions. Are there any questions about the definition of an industry? Are there any definitions about the economy or the market that we're in when I say it's a candidates-driven market? What kind of questions do you have for me for the first few slides that we discussed? Any questions?
You're just welcome to turn your microphones on if you want to ask a question. That's fine.
Okay, no big deal. I'm covering everything like drinking from a fire hose. So let me at least go over 8 steps to launch your search. And again, those of you that have a pad of paper and you're writing these things, great. If you would like me to send you the slides at the end, I'm happy to do that. We're also recording this, but there are basically 8 steps to think about your job search. And this is before we talk about resume writing. This is before you start interviewing. This is before you're negotiating, is that there are 8 steps you have to think about when you're launching your career. Number 1, what industries interest you? Because you want to start narrowing the world down to industries that interest you so you can narrow it down to the type of target firms that you're going to target. There is a term called job search fatigue. And it's when somebody is desperate for a job, they've been in the job market a long time, they haven't gotten a lot of offers, they haven't gotten a lot of responses to their resume, they're just worn out. And my biggest suggestion to them is, have you done your research? Have you narrowed down the world to start targeting those firms and targeting those industries that interest you? So my first question is, find an industry or industries that interest you. Number two, identify where you'd like to live. And I know this sounds crazy, and I know especially for this generation, your generation, collegiate generation, right now, the Generation Z is really interested in exploring travel. You want to travel, you're willing to relocate, whether you're a millennial, Generation Y, or Generation Z, it doesn't matter. But what you got to think about is, where do you want to live? Because that's ultimately what I'm talking about of narrowing the market. So find the industry that you want to work in, identify some geographic areas where you'd like to live. Maybe you want to live by your family. Maybe you want to be by friends. Maybe you want to move to San Diego and you want to live in Southern California. Then what you want to do is you start looking for those industries and those target companies in San Diego, California, as an example. So number three is now start researching those industries that are called urgent industries that are expected to grow. So on one hand, I just asked, what are you passionate about? What are the industries that you like? But now what I want you to do is start researching the industries that are expected to grow. And I'm going to share 2 slides in a second. But I want you to look at industries that are expected to grow in the next 10 years. So for instance, DVD sales. And many of you are probably laughing when I even mentioned DVD sales. But there are still organizations right now that are producing DVDs. And as you and I both know, that is a dying industry. I would not recommend going down that path. Well, on the flip side, you have renewable energy that is exploding, no pun intended. Or you have autonomous vehicles that are starting to grow. Or you have biotechnology or industries that are expected to grow. So as you're thinking about the industries, start looking and researching those industry trends and figuring out the ones that are expected to grow. Number 4 is, now you want to narrow down your search and you want to identify 10 to 15 target firms. You want to find local firms in that industry, but you want to start identifying 10 or 15 firms that are in that region. So the first question I had is, what industries do you like? Number 2 is, where do you want to live? Number 3 is, find those industries that are growing. Number 4 is, find local target firms that are in that industry. Number 5 is, find the 5 to 10 firms that you want to work for. All of a sudden, your world is smaller. It's like a funnel. So now your world is, I want to look at these 10 to 15 firms. I'm going to research these 10 or 15 firms. I recommend you leveraging your network to research these firms. And now you can start preparing your resume and preparing for the interview based on your research. So after you identify the 10 or 15 firms, I want you to leverage your network. Put it on Facebook, put it on social media, ask your peers, ask your professors, ask your family members, ask your friends in your chapter. One question I always recommend to Delta Sigs is, do you know what your best friend's parents do for a living? And there are so many examples I can give you over the years where I've talked to students where, like one student I talked to from Purdue said, I'm really interested in working at Google. And she found out in my seminar, she found out that her roommate, who she lived with for a year and a half, her mom works at Google, and they never knew. So I recommend taking your 10 or 15 firms and leveraging your network. Get the word out and say, does anybody in my network know anybody at these 10 or 15 firms? I'm interested in interviewing with these firms. I like the industry that they're in. I'm passionate about this industry. Start doing your research. After you've leveraged your network, number 7 is, start doing your own market research. Go to their website, go to their site on LinkedIn, Google the company and start researching the company. That way, there are a ton of different ways you can research a company, but the goal is that you have 10 or 15 firms that you want to target. You research those firms so you know as much about them as you can. And now what you want to start doing is you want to start peppering your resume with keywords from job postings from those target companies. So let me repeat that. Identify 10 or 15 firms, research those firms, go to the career page in those firms, download position descriptions that they posted, and identify keywords that they're using in these descriptions, and start peppering your resume. As you build your resume, you're customizing your resume for those 10 or 15 firms. The last step before you start formal interviewing is conduct a couple informational interviews. And an informational interview is you're connected to a company through a referral. So say, for instance, you reach out to Shanda. Shanda Gray in central office, you say you're living in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm interested in this firm. Anheuser-Busch is there, and I know they're owned by InBev, but they have their North American headquarters there. I'm interested in that firm. And say Shanda introduces you to InBev in St. Louis. Well, now what I recommend is reaching out to somebody in InBev that she introduces you to. Reach out on LinkedIn, see if you can do a conference call, do a face-to-face, do a Zoom call, but that's called an informational interview. Your goal is to simply uncover what is it like to work at InBev, what's it like, what's the industry outlook for the beer industry, who are your competitors, what are the type of people that you hire, what makes a rock star in a hire at your firm. So again, an informational interview with a firm and an interview, a conversation that is facilitated by a referral. So I'm going to stop there and just actually go. I'm just going to remind you of what we just talked about. So identify the industry. Tell me where you want to live. Number 3 is identify industries that are urgent and growing. Develop a target list in that industry of companies. So if it's automotive, identify the top 5 or top 10 or top 15 firms in automotive. If it's technology, identify those technology firms in the geographic area where you want to live. Tell your network, here are my top 10 firms. And by the way, if you find in your research that one of those 10 firms are not of interest anymore, throw them out and add another. All that I'm trying to do is have you reduce the amount of stress that you're going to have long-term and really narrow down your search. Once you've done your research, then conduct some informational interviews. So let's talk about the industry. So tonight's program is all about urgent industries and finding hot industries that are expected to grow. So let's talk about declining industries first. So these are industries right now that are on a decline, and they will be for some time. In fact, I would argue I'm not even sure these industries will bounce back. So one of the industries is printing. Printing, everything's going digital. Newspaper publishers or booksellers. Again, everything's going digital, everything's using video, things of that nature. Number 3, retail and department store sales. Now, I think high-end retail will always be here. Like if you're shopping at Louis Vuitton, I think you're always going to go to Louis Vuitton to see the purses, to feel the fabric, whatever it may be. But for the most part, retail is starting to follow the Amazon model, where you can go online, you can buy things that ship to you next day. DVD manufacturing, I mentioned that earlier, DVD manufacturing and distribution. Everything's gone digital, everything is streamed. Wired telecommunications, everything is going wireless. We're moving to a 5G, then there's going to be 6G, then there's going to be 10G, and the telecom industry is evolving dramatically, especially in developing countries. Not only the US, but in developing countries, they're actually skipping the hardwired telecommunications industry and going right to wired as they develop their countries. Postal service is declining. Auto parts manufacturing, travel agents, translation services, and cable. So those are just some examples. When I mention to you find urgent industries, what I'm recommending is stay away from industries that are in the decline. Even if the job is a great job, they're probably not going to be here 5 to 10 years. Now, let's reverse that and talk about the top 5 urgent industries. And so think about what's happening in the world right now. Now, COVID kind of threw a monkey wrench a little bit in everybody's plans, but it forced us to go technical. It forced us to go virtual. It forced us to mobilize. And what that has done, COVID, just as a byproduct of COVID, believe it or not, is it's forcing people to move to the suburbs from the cities. And in my business, the residential growth of first-time home buyers is on a rise. It's forcing people to think about having a bigger house because they might need an office. It's thinking about work-life balance. It's thinking about finding a culture where you enjoy. It's thinking about virtual type of roles and responsibilities. So even that example of COVID has changed a lot. So when I talk about these top 5 urgent industries, these are industries that are expected to double in the next 10 years. So the number 1 is technology. And when I talk about technology, there's 4 subsets of technology that's supposed to grow in the next 10 years. Number one is cybersecurity and defense. You've heard the newscasters talk about zero-day attacks, and there was a pipeline that got hit going to New York. There was a meatpacking company that got cyber alert. One of my good friends is a CIO for an international firm, and one of the hackers figured out a way to make payments so they would be able to get in the accounts payable system and make payments to this hacker's bank account. I mean, there's all kinds of things related to cybersecurity. So that is a hot industry. AI and machine learning. Machine learning and AI, I think, are game changers. A good example of machine learning is a friend of mine owns a company called Assist. And what Assist is it works with machine learning. And for instance, I was walking down in a street in San Francisco, and I pointed my phone, my camera, to a beauty salon. And this beauty salon is Sephora. And as soon as my camera saw the sign of Sephora, I got a text. And the text said, would you like to, welcome to Sephora, would you like to make an appointment? And I said, yes, I would like to make an appointment. And the person came back, said, thank you very much. My name is Betty. I can help you make an appointment. Where would you like to do it? And I said, Seattle, Washington. And it came right back and said, okay, we have 4 salons in Seattle. What geographic area are you going to be in? I mentioned I was going to be in the Water District. And they said, okay, we have this. How about 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or 2 o'clock? And I made an appointment in Sephora for an appointment a week from now in Seattle, Washington. And that is machine learning. It's learning. It's a language where it can pick up. In fact, the majority of you that right now go on support pages like Dell, when you go into Dell and go into their chat rooms, chances are it's not a person. It's a machine answering your questions and getting smarter and smarter. That industry is expected to double in the next 10 years. Data analytics and big data, using data for advertising, using data for an understanding of industry trends and market trends. That market is growing. And finally, virtual reality and virtual infrastructure is, one thing that we've learned over the last year and a half is going virtual is critically important. And so we as a company actually purchased 800 at the time Oculus VR headsets for everybody in our company. Because the thought process is, if we're going to go virtual, let's have a good time doing it, but maybe we can leverage virtual technology for real estate development and meet in a room, send a set of Oculus to a client, bring the project into the room, do a 3D flyover, do a 3D scan, do a drone scan, all kinds of different things with virtual reality. So those are 4 subsets of technology, and there's more, but technology is the number 1 industry. Number 2 is healthcare and life sciences. Now, the reason healthcare is expected to continue to grow, and I'm not just talking about medical professionals, nurses, and doctors, but the reason healthcare is expected to grow is, one is our population is getting older. So people are living longer, requiring more pharmaceutical sales, more services related to people in their hundreds, where the average age, used to be 72. And it's not 100 yet, but I'm saying people are living older because of technology, because of health, because of food choices, all kinds of different things. But what's also happening is last year was the first year that the baby boomer market is starting to retire. And there's 31 million baby boomers. So therefore, any service related to that generation or an older population is going to grow significantly. So pharmaceutical growth, medical devices, hip replacements, knee replacements, things of that nature. Biotechnology research is exploding right now. And then obviously medical professionals, as the medical industry grows, needing more doctors and nurses. But I will tell you, as Delta SIGs, every one of those industries, pharmacies, pharmaceutical sales, medical devices, biotechnology, all of those type of firms hire business students, whether you're in accounting, marketing, finance, whatever it may be, HR, all of those industry, all of those type of subsets of healthcare are going to hire business students. So if you have a passion for healthcare, think about those sectors. Number 3, renewable energy. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in the renewable energy, and we've been in since 2005, but especially in this administration, we're seeing a huge interest in renewable energy and really wind, solar, and battery storage. So as I mentioned, we have designed and permitted about 800 wind farms around the country. We currently have 21 active wind farms under construction right now, probably 800 solar facilities. And a lot of towns, a lot of cities, a lot of manufacturing are looking for solar because the technology has improved so greatly over the last 5 years. And then battery storage. I know this sounds dramatic, but for the first time in humanity's history, we're able to store enough energy in batteries that are utility scale energy that towns can use for their benefit. Because there are things called peak power. And peak power is every night from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. when people are home from work. Granted, COVID has changed that, but also 6 in the morning to 8 in the morning when people are waking up, you're using power in your home. But now, instead of creating more generation, companies are able to create generation in the evening, store it, and then use it when the consumer needs it. So renewable energy is here to stay. Renewable energy, offshore wind is another big market we're starting to see. So think about renewable energy as being a sustainable source, and I think it's going to grow exponentially for the next 10 years. Another industry that's interesting, number 4, are actually trades, construction, and infrastructure. And trades are interesting. People often ask me, I'm really interested in becoming an electrician, but as a business student, I don't know if I could want to make that transition and so forth. I will tell you, the trades, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, own one of those organizations, grow a company and own it yourself. That industry is never going to be automated. You can't automate a leaky faucet. You can't automate HVAC or construction. So no matter what, that's going to require expertise and skill. Same thing with infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of money, governmental infrastructure stimulus dollars going to infrastructure. And so trades, construction, and infrastructure is expected to grow. And the reason construction is growing is not only is it growing because of COVID and a lot of real estate and land development growth, but we're also seeing a significant migration. I get a report once a quarter from U-Haul that provides me with a migration pattern of people. And we're definitely seeing a huge, and what I get in this report are one-way U-Haul rentals, which tells me people are moving and not coming back. So they're getting a one U-Haul rental. We're seeing New York, a lot of people leaving New York going to Florida and the Southeast. We're seeing a significant amount of people in Michigan and Illinois going to the west coast of Florida as well as Texas, and many people in Southern California or California going to Phoenix, Arizona. So the 3 states that construction is still growing significantly is Arizona, Texas, and Florida. So again, as you're thinking about an urgent industry, think about what's going on in the world. Think about the economics in certain states. Think about taxation in certain states. Think about trends, buying trends, and so forth, because that could impact the industry that you're looking at. And the last one, and I'm going to stop and see if you have any questions. The last one is management consulting. The one thing we're starting to see is niche expertise is being rewarded handsomely. So companies that are looking to outsource areas that aren't their niche, meaning you have development companies that might not want to do the land acquisition piece, or you might have software companies that want to outsource certain aspects of their development. So management consulting, the Accentures, the PwCs, the Deloitte and Touches of the world that have the consulting side, not the audit side, but the consulting side, are expected to grow substantially. So those are the 5 top urgent industries right now. Will it change in 6 months? Probably. But right now it's technology, healthcare, renewable energy, trades, construction, infrastructure, and then finally management consulting. So I'm going to stop there for a second. Any questions about the list of steps, or any questions about the industries that I just talked about? This is the interaction part. You unmute, you ask a question, we interact, and it's great. We have a lot of time. I can answer a lot of questions. So I'm yours for the evening if you're interested. So if you do have questions, you want to stay until the end, by all means. And I'd be happy to ask me a customized question to yourself. Is this industry good or this industry good? I'm not an expert in a lot, but there's some things that I do know. So let me know if you have any questions. Here are some sources that I would recommend. So when you're thinking about the industry research and tools, there's a couple of things that I recommend. So from a governmental standpoint, there are 3 sources that I think are good. I think Census Bureau gives you industry data and sector data. So going to the Census Bureau is easy to do, and it's going to give you a lot of information about growth standards and and census information that companies fill out. The second one is the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So that's data is presented in national accounts. So what is the economic growth of certain industries? And that is a good example of where things are going in the future. So the economic analysis associated with people buying products, people investing products, and so forth. And the third is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It just basically shows you the consumer price index, producer price indexes. It'll tell you where people are producing more material and people are buying more material. So those three governmental sources, I think, are good places to start: Census Bureau, Economic Analysis Bureau, and then the labor statistics. Now, on the private side, these are the tools that I use the most. So for instance, if I were you and I'm interested in an industry or a couple different industries, identify a trade association in that industry. So as an example, if you are interested in renewable energy, one of the best trade associations is the American Wind Energy Association. It's AWEA. AWEA has on their website companies that are growing, trends, technology. It'll give you a lot of information about the industry. And by the way, it'll give you a lot of information in preparation for an interview. So if you come into my office in an interview and you tell me, I'm interested in renewable energy, I'm interested in solar or wind, I went to the AWEA and I've seen some of the trends. I know some of the companies that are growing. Are you currently working with Acciona? Are you currently working with Main Street Renewables? Are you currently working with NextEra? Those are the companies that continue to be at the top of the list for renewable growth. So that's an example that I would share, that you're benefiting from the trade association and it helps you in an interview. The other thing these associations will give you is a list of their sponsors and a list of partner companies. And companies pay to be a member of these associations in hopes that people like you seek us out. So AWEA is a good one. IEEE, Advances in Technology. Now, IEEE used to be an industry just for electrical engineers. It has now evolved into all things technology. So if you are interested in technology, software trends, everything associated with technology growth, IEEE is a fantastic organization. It's probably one of the largest focused on technology. Another industry association or trade journal is actually produced by PwC. So PricewaterhouseCoopers is a consulting firm, just like Deloitte, just like Accenture, and so on and so forth. But one report that they send out, and it's free, it's called the Market Trends Annual Report. And so PwC produces this every year, and probably the top 30 industries in the country are highlighted by PwC. So they go through the data and they walk you through the trends in that industry. What's the annual report look like? What's the health of that industry? What are the risks? So think about SIPOC. When you think about SWOT analysis, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses, opportunities, threats? You know, what we learn in college. What is the SWOT analysis for a certain industry? PwC will walk you through it. So that is a really good annual report. A number of other annual reports are also produced by other trade journals. So trade journals and trade associations is a great source. Next one is IBISN World. So IBIS World is industry research, and they have probably 2,000 different industries that are members of this website and this association, and they give you a lot of information around that growth as well. The last two are more personal. I really like CNBC. I watch it every morning. CNBC is it's non-political, it's not news, it talks about economic growth, what companies are starting to grow. Now, obviously, a lot of it is publicly held companies, not private, but it gives you the trends by industry. It tells you what companies are leading the charge. It talks about what companies are not, companies that are growing in certain geographic areas. So CNBC is really worthwhile in my mind. The other document is the Wall Street Journal. I read every morning cover to cover just to understand where the trends are. So think about those media companies and maybe a media company that you like. And then a last couple searches are investment tools. Think about an investment tool as these investment websites are made for people that want to invest their dollars and they want to invest them in growing companies. So I often find that these tools are great indicators of where companies are growing. For instance, there's a website free. It's called Seeking Alpha. Seeking Alpha is a free website. It gives you and tracks certain stocks, certain public companies that are expected to grow, certain industry segments that are growing and shrinking. That is a really good source to figure out where is the money going, where are people investing, because if people are investing in those type of firms, chances are there's growth. Bloomberg is another one. Bloomberg is another website. It's not political. It's not a lot of news. It talks about economic data. And that's really what you want to look at when you're thinking about your companies is what companies are expected to grow. If they're growing, that means they have opportunities for new hires and they have opportunities for growth. The last easiest search is a Google search. Take your top 10 or 15 firms, do a Google search on those firms, and just uncover what are you finding out about them? What news are hitting the markets? Is there good news? Is there bad news? Things of that nature. So these are some good tools that I use a lot, especially the trade associations, that as you're thinking about the industries, think about these tools and maybe leverage them for yourself. The last slide that I'll leave you with, and then I'm opening it up for questions, is looking for a job is a sport. And it's challenging and it's a one-on-one sport, meaning it's up to the work that you put into identifying the industries, figuring out where you want to live, researching the top 10 firms, doing an informational interview, developing a resume, interviewing, selling yourself, differentiating yourself, and finally getting that job. Is that it's a stressful endeavor. And what I have found is those students that spend time narrowing down the market, just as we talked about, those individuals that spend time figuring out what value they bring to a company or what differentiates them in the market. Like, I want you to think about what differentiates you. If you were to come to my company to interview, what differentiators do you have compared to the other 10 candidates I'm interviewing? Are you a quick learner? Are you logical? Are you really good with Microsoft Office products? Are you a good listener? Do you deal with stress well? Are you a team player? Whatever the skill is you have. But you as the candidate have to figure out what skill that will differentiate you to get the job you want. But the one thing that most job books don't talk about, most advisors don't talk about, is find a culture that you'll thrive in. So I want you to think about your life, and I want you to think about two things. Number one is, who are the 5 people you hang out with the most? Those 5 people you hang out with the most will be the byproduct of your personality. And I'm not asking you to change friends by any means, but if you hang out with people that are more laid back, that are more relaxed, that maybe don't have a lot of initiative, unfortunately, it's going to rub off. You're not going to have a lot of initiative. You hang out with people that are high charging and are interested, not interesting, and they have a passion for growth, whatever it may be, is you will find yourself gravitating to the 5 people you hang out with the most. So as part of that is I want you to think about the culture that you'll like working in. Is it a team-oriented culture or is it more individualistic? And there's not a right answer here. Some people don't like interacting with people. Some people would rather come to the office. They're nice. They will say hi. They'll eat the cake at the birthday party. They'll be involved in the company activities, but they would rather go to their desk. They'd rather go to their office or computer and work on their own stuff. But what would help you thrive in a culture? And that's what I want you to think about when you're taking your 10 to 15 firms. Think about the kind of culture that you want to work in. Team-oriented, domestic or international, well-educated, hardworking, whatever it may be. So think about the culture. And these 3 points, in my mind, will be the points that you will use the rest of your life. As I am doing, whether I'm doing a seminar at a college campus or I'm doing a virtual seminar or I'm coaching an executive, I share these 3 points every time. And I tell everybody is that these are the 3 points that I want to share that will ultimately define your career success. Number 1 is find personal satisfaction. Find a company, find a job where you're personally satisfied. You get up in the morning, you're excited, you're happy to go to work. You enjoy the people, you enjoy the environment, you feel respected. You feel good about going to that. And that's the culture of inclusion. So find a company that you have personal satisfaction. And that's number 1. If at any point in time, you're no longer satisfied with your company or your role, either you talk to your supporting leader and get a raise or a promotion, or you leave the company. But my recommendation is find a culture that you'll thrive in, and personal satisfaction is number 1. Number 2, find a company where you have professional development. And that's where you're learning, you're growing, you're expanding, you have job rotations, you're learning new challenges, you're solving problems, You feel accomplished at the end of the day. They're paying for school, they're paying for MBAs, they're paying for CPAs, whatever it may be. But there's some aspect of professional development. The last thing is financial reward. Are you being paid a fair market salary or a fair market wage? And I will tell you, it's in that order. So in your career, personal satisfaction, professional development, financial reward is in that order. If you reverse that order, you will leave in 18 months on average. So those executives that I've talked to that take a job for money, on average, leave within 18 months. And you being young, it's critically important that you don't have the reputation of being a job jumper. You don't want to leave a job every 2 years, because by the time you get to your fifth or sixth job, it gives me a red flag as the hiring manager. So don't take a job for money. No matter what, you will have time to make money. And here's my philosophy. If you're happy at what you're doing and you're professionally growing, money will follow because you're going to be successful. So personal satisfaction, professional development, and financial reward, in my mind, are the three pieces that I want you to carry in the rest of your life. So here is my email address, and I will give you my cell phone number if you want to call. But here's my question. Those of you, there's a lot of data that we talked about. We primarily talked about the job search process as well as urgent industries. But ultimately, what questions do you have about your job search, or maybe industries that you're interested in? If you'd like to know more about, are they growing? Are they shrinking? What kind of questions do you have for me?
Tim, a question came in earlier from
Please.
me. Do you have any advice on how someone would choose an industry they are interested in if someone has no idea which industry would spark passion?
Good question. Believe it or not, is my recommendation starts with TV. When you're watching television, what interest do you have on TV? Or when you're on YouTube, are there certain things that you go to on YouTube or you gravitate toward? When there's a commercial, are there certain industries that pique your interest, like international travel or technology or manufacturing? So the first one, and that's the most simple, is are there things that you get excited about? Number two is, are there items that you like to purchase? Meaning, do you get passionate about fashion? Do you get passionate about technology? Do you find yourself researching before you buy a laptop? Do you find yourself doing more research on a laptop than you did in buying a car? And those are all signals of things that may be passionate in your psyche, that you might say, hey, I'm kind of interested in that. Or I guess here's a better question is, are there industries or companies that you have a lot of respect for? So right now, when you're thinking about publicly held companies or privately held companies that you know about, are there companies that interest you? And the question is, why do they interest you? Do their products and services interest you? Does their company reputation interest you? Does their culture of that company or the reputation of that culture interest you? That's how I typically walk down the path of identifying someone's passion. And by the way, you can have multiple passions. You know, when I started out of college, I was really interested in technology. So I joined a startup software company. I worked there for 11 years. I met a group of partners that are my partners now that are in real estate. And I became really interested in real estate. So some of this will evolve, but I guess the first question is, are there companies that you have a passion for, their products, their services, their culture, or are there things that pique your interest when you're doing your research, or are there things that you watch on TV or on the radio that interest you when you hear their commercial? Does that make, or I'm not sure who asked the question, Shanda, but does that answer that question?
I think so. While meeting planning is definitely my passion, apparently I need to be a high crime detective who drinks a lot of wine. So
I know that's part of the job description. Perfect.
Great. Other questions? You're welcome to turn your mic on, or if you want to type it in the chat. It's just a small group of us. You're welcome to turn your cameras on too.
Yeah, please.
Okay, I have a question.
Please.
So, since, you know, we're kind of coming out of this pandemic in this area where I'm at least, we're going back to being around large groups again, on campus, not wearing masks around a lot of people. So I think that's kind of added stress on top of already the stress of going into school and maybe even people coming into new industries. Like, what's a way of dealing with like the stress from that?
You mean the stress of the stress of COVID or the stress of interacting with individuals back on campus?
I guess like what I'm trying to say is like how like to be the most productive. Like how do you deal with stress like that so that way you can be productive and not like stressed out of it?
Well, I mean, granted, there's a lot of angles I can take the question, but my personal opinion is um, make sure you're comfortable before you enter any of the situations. For instance, my company, we decided to close our offices on March 13th, 2020. And we have some people coming to the offices, but employee and team member safety was critically important. And so as we slowly reopen, we're looking at things like hybrid models for people to come in a couple days a week, um, physical distancing to make people feel comfortable. So the first piece of advice I would give you is when you're looking for a company, as an example, look at the culture and figure out how they managed some of the COVID challenges. It's the same thing with school. If you don't feel comfortable and you're distracted with that stress level, my recommendation is either ask the professors if there's a virtual component to this class, ask if you can sit a little bit away, ask if you can maybe get notes afterwards, maybe talk to the professor on the phone. But ultimately, I think the best way to handle, at least from my standpoint, and I'm not a doctor, so I can't necessarily give you advice on stress management, but I think that people are less stressed when they feel in control. And if can give my team members control if they come in or not, because we're giving it the option up to my employees, is that we're saying, listen, if you feel comfortable coming in and you've been vaccinated, or you feel comfortable in coming in and wearing PPE, that's totally acceptable. If you don't feel comfortable, we will still make accommodations to be a virtual environment. And so from my standpoint, if you give that person control, it's going to reduce the stress. And it's the same in your world. If there's a way that you can maybe take control of how you attend classes, or maybe how you learn from the professor. Everybody's going through this. So not the nice thing. There's no, I always want to be optimistic, but I know that a lot of people are going to be worried about asking the professor for special accommodations. But you know what? That professor is thinking the same thing. That professor is worried about, do I have to get vaccinated or not? Am I going to be around students that I don't know where they were over the weekend? Do I have to teach in the class, or can I remain virtual? I mean, there's a lot of thoughts that even professors have. So if you are uncomfortable about that going back to class, reach out to a professor and say, listen, I'm really interested in your class. I'm a little uncomfortable about necessarily sitting in there. Is there any other options that I have? Could I do office hours over the phone? Could I sit in the back of the room? I don't want to make a big deal about it, but I just wanted to let you know that I have a little bit of concern. And I bet you will find that most professors will accommodate because they're worried about the same thing. Does that answer your question, Megan?
That was perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Any other questions? If not, that's okay. We can have, Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah. Tim, I just always love your presentations. You are
thank you.
a wealth of knowledge and just a
Thanks.
wonderful presenter. And I'm only speaking for myself, but I imagine others feel the same way. I was just, from an employer standpoint, I'm just curious, like, you gave some awesome pointers on like preparing for an interview, like doing your research, which is very, very important in preparation. But what are your like top 3 interviewing questions that you ask to a candidate? Like, what do you always ask?
I always ask the first question, why are you interested in Atwell? So my company, obviously it's my company, but why are you interested in Atwell? And I want to hear, are they interested in my industry? Have they done their research? Do they know the industries that we're in? Or are they just simply looking for a job? And I've had candidates tell me, I just need a job. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say this, but it just turns me off because I'm not interested in just hiring a person to fill a box. I'm interested in hiring somebody that knows Atwell or is interested in Atwell or interested in the industry. So the number one question I always ask is, why are you interested in my firm? Number 2 is I will ask, what differentiates you among your peers? And I'm not asking you to brag, although I'm asking you what skill sets or what value do you believe you bring to a team? And so that's the second question I ask. And then the third question I always ask is, what are your expectations from a culture standpoint? What kind of culture would you thrive in? Because in my company, it's a fairly type A organization. It's a work hard, play hard type company. It's a very smart organization. And I think it's a very entrepreneurial organization. And I ask that because I asked the question about culture, because people that come from a very structured environment and have processes and procedures and guidelines and reports and case studies, they would probably think we're crazy. And so I often I often ask what type of culture they're interested in, because if they describe a very rigid, I'm a taskmaster, I want to be told what to do and do it, I always explain we're probably not the culture for you. We are very team oriented, but we're very entrepreneurial. We're expecting to hire professionals and kind of have them do what they do. So those are three questions that I ask most of the time. What about you? I get you're from industry or you're from business school. What kind of questions do you ask? Let me ask that.
Well, it's funny because I am in career development. So
Okay.
I of course, are like, advising students in education and like how to respond to interviews and whatnot. And it's interesting. Yeah, I think that was the top one. Of course, it's tell me about yourself. That seems to be the very generic elevator pitch, question that an employer would ask. And then, yeah, you're so right. I get that so many from different employers that they want to know, what do you know about our company? And I've had that in my interviews, that again, it always comes back to preparation and researching the company. And if I know the job that I'm in with now at Clear University, if I wouldn't have known about, just their amazing growth the past 5 years and how they built their athletics and their student organizations, I may not have gotten the job,
Right.
So it's always really nice and refreshing to hear like what employers are kind of asking candidates. And I think that's right in line of what you said. Yeah.
Now I will tell you, I know I shared one of the points tonight about an informational interview, and many people are scared to death to do an informational interview. Meaning they're worried about putting the executive out. They don't want to call somebody they don't know. But man, I will tell you, it's probably one of the best differentiators. If somebody recommends you to a company or a person, I highly recommend you to call that person and say, hey, Shanna Gray or Tim Augustine recommended that I give you a call. I don't want to bother you, or send an email. I don't want to bother you, but I'm really interested in working at Google or Intel or whatever the company is. I'm interested in your firm. Would you mind spending 10 or 15 minutes on the phone next Tuesday, just telling me a little bit about what you look for in candidates? And that simple question differentiates you completely from the market, because it shows that you're mature, it shows that you're interested, and you're willing to reach out. And it takes a lot of guts to call somebody you don't know. But I will tell you, so many of my friends that have been successful, and so many of the candidates that I coach have been successful simply because of that one step. And the nice thing about an informational interview is that it's not a lot of pressure. It's not a formal interview. You're not bringing your resume. I'm not talking about comp. It might turn into that. And if you're good in the conversation, chances are that company is going to say, hey, why don't you send me your resume? I'd be happy to introduce you. But that is one differentiator, that if you're talking to your students, if they can have the courage to call somebody that's a referral, man, is that a differentiator? That's a really good step in the right direction.
I totally completely agree with that. In fact, we have a career planning course that we've integrated in our curriculum that I co-teach, and that's actually one of the assignments.
Oh, cool.
And a lot of students, I mean, they do it through LinkedIn, they do it through an email,
right?
Or it's a phone call, especially if they kind of know that person through, their social network, where it's more laid back. And part of the assignment actually is, there's two parts to the assignment. The first part is coming up with the 10 questions, right? And again, that goes back to preparation. So then when you have exactly what you said, Tim, is when you have that date, you already have these questions, right? You've already done the research.
Exactly.
So then it's just asking the questions. And I think a lot of employers too, and or that person is going to feel like special. Like I mean, it's an honor. Like, wow, I know I would feel like, wow, thank you. I am more than happy to give you my insight on this particular company or sector where I'm working in.
Exactly. Especially if it's a referral. You will find that if your resume or your name is referred to by somebody that knows that person, there's a 99% chance you're going to get interviewed. So that's the reason I recommend you talking to your peers. Get the word out. Ask people on Facebook, ask people on Instagram, hey, do you know anybody of these 5 to 10 or 15 firms? Any introduction would be helpful. And you'll be amazed how many people come out with names and contacts. And in fact, I recommend those of you that are in chapters right now, spend one chapter meeting. And I take the agenda that you guys normally focus on and have the chancellor run a meeting where you're just talking about every chapter or every brother in the chapter bring their top 3 firms, put their top 3 firms on the slide and ask all their brothers, does anybody in this room know anybody at these 3 firms? And you will be amazed how connected the chapter is and you've never asked before. So using your network for that benefit of a referral is fantastic. Awesome.
Great.
Any other questions? Well, again, thank you so much. 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You took the time to take the call tonight. I appreciate everybody joining. My email is tatwell-group.com. And my cell phone, if you want to give me a call, is 630-310-7255. If you want to reach out, ask me any questions, send me your resume. I'd be happy to take a look at it. I'd be happy to edit it, give you my feedback. But again, as a brother, I'm here to help. I really appreciate everybody taking the time today. And Shanda, thanks